putting up the best they could, but the 16 would keep jamming. They'd throw it down and try and grab another one. Did you know that American soldiers in Vietnam were found dead with their rifles disassembled or cleaning rods jammed in the barrel, showing they were desperately trying to make their M16 work in their final moments? Reports came in of squads where half of their rifles stopped firing in the middle of battle. It went so far that soldiers no longer trusted their weapon at all, writing home and begging their families to send cleaning kits. Only later, after hundreds of soldiers had already died, did the truth finally come out, what had actually happened and whose fault it was. And the answer might shock you, just as it shocked the soldiers when they realized the very country they fought for had let them down. So to make this story make sense, let's start with why the M16 rifle was made the way it is. In the years after World War II, the U.S. Army found itself with a variety of different weapons and different calibers for its infantry, with bars, Garands, carbines, submachine guns, and the various Browning machine guns all mixed together in the same squad. The war showed just how difficult it was to resupply units, to deliver to every single soldier the exact ammo type he needed. Not to mention that you had to produce all those different types of weapons, ammo, magazines, and equipment for them, and then train soldiers to use all of them. So, as the dust from World War II slowly settled, the American military sought a new DOIT all-weapon in one universal caliber. Countries of the newly formed NATO alliance agreed to develop weapons around a single caliber, so they could support each other with ammo if a new global war erupted, and that became 7.62x51 NATO. They then built what was basically an improved M1 Garand chambered in this caliber, the M14. It had a heavy steel receiver and wooden stock, a 20-round magazine, and could even fire in full auto. But it looked like this. It weighed around 10 lb loaded, and it would soon be realized that this cartridge was more suitable for purpose-built machine guns that could manage the recoil of a full-power round in automatic fire. At the same time, they were looking at post-war data which showed that most firefights occurred well within 300 yards, and that soldiers rarely actually hit anything beyond that distance with their standard rifles. Now, submachine guns are not quite great for anything beyond 50 yards, but a full-power 30 caliber round was definitely overkill under this range. With this in mind, and while trying to modernize the M14, Armalite designer Eugene Stoner developed the AR-10, but soon got an even better idea. The AR-10 was chambered in the same caliber, but used aircraft-grade aluminum and plastic instead of steel and wood. He also introduced a new direct gas impingement system that vented gas straight back into the bolt carrier to cycle the action. This greatly reduced recoil and allowed the stock and barrel to be in a straight line. However, he was encouraged by that data about most firefights happening at close range and by the newly discovered performance of small caliber, high-velocity rounds such as the .23 Remington, later to become the 5.56 NATO. He then took the promising concept of the AR-10 and basically downsized it into the AR-15 chambered in this new caliber. Now, this was quite a step forward with the modern-looking rifle, weighing under 7 lbs, but what was best about it was how controllable it was to fire. It had almost no recoil with single shots and was incredibly controllable in full auto. The long 20-in barrel gave the small projectile a very high muzzle velocity, around 3,200 ft/s, and it compensated with speed for its lightweight to remain very destructive on the human body. Tests showed that it would often tumble upon hitting bone, cause hydroshock, and in this way create similar damage to the much larger 7.62. Once in combat, however, it wouldn't be exactly like that. Soldiers realized they had to hit their enemies multiple times to stop them, as the small, fast-moving round would go straight through the body and cause minimal damage if no vital organ was hit. But this wasn't the problem that would very soon be killing American soldiers issued with this new weapon. It turned out to be something much darker. Actually, through tests and trials, to not bother you with all that, they eventually came up with the M16. The U.S. military saw this rifle as the solution. They needed to standardize a single weapon, and it was chosen over the M14, which had the shortest service life, being pulled out basically as soon as it was introduced. You see, this way the soldier had quite a capable platform for under 300-yard engagements, but could carry almost 3 times more bullets than 7.62 for the same weight, which is not a small difference. Now, as the tensions in Vietnam were rising, the first M16, still designated experimental, were sent for field and combat testing. They were shipped to American advisors and elite South Vietnamese units that were fighting communist guerrillas at the time. and very soon soldiers were delighted with the ergonomics, accuracy, and lightweight. Ideal for jungle patrols, the M16 was praised and in reports described as superior in virtually all respects to the World War II-era weapons. Its plastic stock didn't swell and bend in the humid, tropical climate like the M14 did, and it carried itself well in dirt and mud. They reported minimal to almost no malfunctions after firing thousands of rounds both on the range and in combat. And these reports only solidified the M16 as the true answer for the American Army. So it was fully adopted and went into production, issued to all units just in time as the war in Vietnam escalated in 1965 and large numbers of American infantry units arrived. However, when they entered combat for the first time, the complete shock came. Tens of thousands of young soldiers stepped off transports carrying their sleek, black rifles everyone had told them good things about. They had every reason to believe they were holding the most modern weapon to crush. Guerrillas armed with rusty old AKs, large patrols through the jungle, and rice paddies were now launched to find and flush out the enemy, and soon the first large-scale firefights broke out. But then all of a sudden, their cutting-edge rifle that had been praised until now didn't work. After a couple of magazines fired in actual battle, the M16 would just stop firing. Soldiers picked up rifles from fallen comrades and continued firing until those two ceased. They were frantically trying to clean the jams, but in most cases, there was nothing they could do. Reports began flooding in of half of the squad's rifles seizing during firefights. Soldiers found dead beside their disassembled rifles, obviously trying to make them work before they were killed. Some had to use rifles as clubs and with bayonets in desperate hand-to-hand fights. While anyone who had a sidearm was considered lucky, soldiers were desperately trying to take any working weapon they could find, even from the enemy, just to have something to fight with. One platoon leader furiously reported that 32 out of 80 rifles in his company malfunctioned during a single engagement, and the battle turned into horrible hand-to-hand fighting with soldiers, literally using their knives and helmets to kill the enemy. Even when conducting recon by fire during patrols, soldiers discovered their rifles jamming after a few bursts, leaving them without a weapon if someone returned fire. And a lot of times this would happen. No one had any idea what was going on, nor could they even imagine what the real reason behind these malfunctions was. Soldiers began carrying more grenades and trying to get their hands on any sidearm they could find, even using the old World War II-era weapons that were supposed to be obsolete compared to the revolutionary M16. To make everything even worse, the M16 was advertised as the self-cleaning rifle for some reason, as if that thing even exists, and they were issued, listen to this, without cleaning kits. Not a single .22 caliber cleaning kit was sent along with the first shipments of some 85,000 rifles for the whole year. And manuals didn't even emphasize maintenance. They were operating in the jungle, remember, with several Dayong patrols through mud and rice paddies. Soldiers soon wrote home asking for cleaning rods for hunting rifles and gun oil that the Army didn't give them. There is a recorded instance where a soldier, the only one in his platoon with a cleaning rod, was running from position to position during a firefight and clearing jams until he was shot and killed. But the jungle was not the problem. Far from it. One of the biggest causes for the M16 to jam was torn cartridges. The spent casing would swell and its rim would get torn. It would stay stuck in the chamber. The only way to clear it was to ram it out with a rod from the muzzle. Those same rods that they weren't issued. You know, soldiers were just pissed, unable to comprehend why this was happening all of a sudden with the rifle that was supposed to be great. The barrels became so clogged with powder, residue that light wasn't even shining through them. Yet the gun was supposed to be quote-unquote self-cleaning. Investigators from Colt were soon sent to find out what was happening with their rifle, and they would eventually find out. Although for years the answer was covered up because it would uncover criminal negligence or, according to many, outright sabotage of the M16 by the very country for which those soldiers killed with faulty rifles were fighting. Here is the thing. During early development, the AR-15 had been tested with very well-known commercially IMR powder. It was a stick-shaped powder that burned at a predictable rate and produced modest pressure, but left little powder residue. Later, as the M16 was going through its testing phase, the ammunition based on that type of powder was used, and the rifle didn't have any trouble with reliability, especially nowhere near the catastrophic failures experienced in Vietnam. However, in 1964, the Army Ordnance Department took control of procurement, and for some reason, just before the rifle was about to enter a full-scale war, changed the powder type in its ammunition to WC-846. commonly known as ball powder. Now, bull powder had been introduced in World War II, and it was much cheaper to produce in huge amounts, mostly used as propellant for artillery shells. The Army had enormous stockpiles of this powder and saw the perfect opportunity to use it in the new upcoming war. So, at the very last moment before American infantry arrived in significant numbers in Vietnam, they shifted to this powder for M16 rounds. And look at this. With no prior testing whatsoever, the designer of the M16 wasn't even consulted about changing the powder. If he had been, this debacle in Vietnam could probably have been prevented with necessary adjustments to the rifle to handle this now much different ammo. Now here's what this new powder actually did to the M16. First, it burned faster and produced much higher pressure. This raised muzzle velocity and even the rate of fire to over 1,000 rounds per minute as the bolt was pushed back faster. The rifle absolutely wasn't designed for any of this. The cartridge also wasn't designed for such pressure and would deform and swell after firing, or its rims would be torn for the same reason, causing those failure to extract jams. That became the M16's signature malfunction. Ball powder also left significantly more unburned residue that would clog the barrel, go back through the gas system, and accumulate in the heart of the mechanism. When it cooled, it became like hard plastic that would cause all sorts of problems. And on top of all that, soldiers had nothing to clean them with or maintain the rifle properly. There is no such thing as a self-cleaning rifle in the world. However, the Army Ordnance didn't stop there with its quote-unquote help for the M16. They also insisted on adding a forward assist feature that was absolutely not needed. Even the M16's designer protested against it since it only added more ways dirt could get in. The M16 was already designed in a way that if a round didn't chamber as it should, the soldier could pull the charging handle again and release it, which would chamber the round properly or eject the faulty one. Pushing it with the forward assist by force would just deform the cartridge and make it stuck in the chamber, with now no way to pull it out. But that's still not all. It is also said the M16 was expected to be replaced soon, so Army Ordnance didn't bother spending money on equipment around the rifle, like for example good magazines. Initial 20-round magazines were intended to be quote semi-disposable, so they were made cheaply from aluminum, and after use in the field, the feed lips would bend and springs would weaken, just adding to the already catastrophic malfunction rate. Have you ever noticed in movies soldiers tapping the magazine on their helmet before inserting it in the rifle? Well, they actually did that to shake rounds inside, because they'd often get stuck while feeding. This jamming crisis was quietly pushed down through the chain of command. But once soldiers' letters and interviews reached the public in alarming numbers, something finally had to be done. Before finding out who was behind all these ingenious quote improvements, the U.S. military had to stop their soldiers from getting killed. The first priority was to send cleaning kits and manuals to frontline units. New M16 rifles were redesigned with a trap door in the stock that held a small cleaning kit, so a soldier would always have it at hand. And new troops were instructed how to maintain their rifle in the field. The chamber was chrome-lined, and soon after the bore was as well, so it wouldn't rust and would be easier to clean powder residue. Even rifles already fielded were retrofitted with these features. A stronger buffer and spring were introduced for better control during full auto, reducing the rate of fire to a more controllable 800 rounds per minute as initially intended. That also reduced stress on other parts. Finally, the powder issue was addressed and it was reformulated and stabilized to work better with the rifle and produce less residue that caused problems. Better reusable magazines were also delivered, with 25 and 30 round ones starting to appear as well. Many other smaller adjustments were also made, like the extractor, and the flash suppressor was changed from an open 3-prong to a closed so-called bird cage, so it wouldn't catch dirt or snag on vines in the jungle. The M16 then began to be as dependable and effective as it was in its experimental phase, and soldiers slowly began to trust their weapon again. But now, why did so many soldiers have to die first? Were they literally sabotaged by the very Army Ordnance? And if so, why? And would there be some consequence for those responsible? Well, Congress held hearings. Investigators spoke of criminal negligence or even deliberate sabotage. And yet, no individual was ever truly held responsible for the decisions that put faulty rifles in soldiers' hands. They dissolved the old Army Ordnance Department and closed the Springfield Armory in 1968, while the rifle itself was redesigned as the M16A1. No one was fired, prosecuted, or demoted over the debacle that cost the lives of many American soldiers. As for the M16, it evolved through many improvements once the problems were solved. It would slowly shift more toward the M4 carbine, which is the M16's direct descendant, just shorter and lighter with a wide variety of accessories that could be added. And it slowly replaced the M16 as the new standard infantry rifle.